Now that we've adjourned, I appreciate everybody staying as opposed to just jumping out of the room. I've got about 10 minutes to close us out, and I want to share two stories with you before I send you on your way. Let's go back to Disneyland. It's July 17th again, only now it's July 17th, 1965. And a standing room only crowd gathers inside the Magnolia Room to celebrate what was a happy event for the happiest place on earth. Disneyland, Walt Disney's impossible dream that most believed would be bankrupt, shuttered, and forgotten in 6 months or less, was instead celebrating 10 years of unparalleled success. And so Walt, along with his brother Roy, took the stage that night and thanked everyone in the room, his team, for helping to make what everyone believed was the impossible possible. And then Walt spent only a few moments on the past and instead quickly focused on the future. And I think that's part of Walt Disney's success. He didn't allow the pain from his past to dictate his future because he always had a bigger vision for the future. And in focusing on the future, he said to his team, if you think we're going to stop, if you think we're just going to rest on our laurels, you're out of your mind. No, we are just getting started. And then he used the rest of his time that evening to talk up $40 million worth of expansion at Disneyland. And on that particular evening, Walt Disney's Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow was really never brighter. Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln had just opened fresh from the 1964-65 New York World's Fair. They were in the middle of building the first expansion at Disneyland, New Orleans Square, which would open in the summer of 1966. They were converting Pirates of the Caribbean from the pedestrian walk-through ride into the iconic boat ride that we talked about last night. The Haunted Mansion was standing waiting for its 999 happy haunts. And then Walt began to talk about another renovation of Tomorrowland, what would come to be known as Walt's World on the Move, which would include the People Mover and his all-time favorite attraction, again from the World's Fair, the Carousel of Progress. So they really were just getting started. But here's the kicker, Cap. When Walt was saying to his team, we're just getting started, and then talked up $40 million worth of expansion, it was really just a distraction. It was just a diversion to what Walt Disney was actually up to in the middle of the 1960s. Because in the room that night, only about a dozen people knew the real truth. Only 3 people had gone into the secret room and had laid eyes on what Walt Disney was really up to in Central Florida. Because when Walt said to his team, we're not going to rest on our laurels, we're just getting started, he wasn't referring to what he had already done, i.e. Disneyland. Walt Disney was going to do what he swore he would never do, and that was, of course, build another Disneyland, what we know of today as Walt Disney World. As you get ready to head out from this conference, I don't want you to think of this as the ending, but instead think of it as the what? The beginning. You're just getting started. You've had a lot of great conversations, a lot of great panels, hopefully have received a lot of great information. What are you going to do with it? Where are you going to go from here? This is the start. It's not the finish line. And to emphasize that, again, that evening, July 17, 1965, took place at the Disneyland Hotel. Share the backstory behind that particular hotel. When Walt was building the park back in the 1950s, he didn't have money to do the project. He barely had money for building the park itself, and so all of the shops, all of the restaurants, and the hotel itself got leased out to other entities, to other partners, to other companies. Disneyland was 30 miles south of Los Angeles in the middle of nowhere, home to 14,000 people, all of 60 hotel rooms. The public was excited about Walt's new project, so excited that Walt was getting 800 calls a day asking about overnight accommodations, because if you're going to drive 30 miles south from Los Angeles to go to an amusement park in the 1950s, chances are you probably wanted a place to stay overnight. And so Walt called the Marriott, he called the Hilton, he called the Sheraton and said, hey, I'm building an amusement park. It's going to be amazing. I'm getting 800 calls a day. Would you build me a hotel? They wanted nothing to do with it because, like everybody else, to again include his own wife and his own brother, they thought the project was going to be a failure. And so Walt ultimately called up his friend Jack Rather, who was a Texas oilman and a movie producer. If you've ever seen The Lone Ranger or the Lassie television program, that was a Jack Rather production. And Jack was recently getting into the hotel business. He brings Jack out to the property, shows him what he's up to, and says, I need a hotel. Anaheim only has 60 rooms. I'm getting 800 calls a day. I'm never going to make it without some sort of hotel. And Jack looks at the orange grove, the walnut trees, the bulldozers and piles of dirt that we talked about last night, and Jack says, I don't know, Walt. That seems like a huge investment for something that is far too risky, and like everybody else, I'm afraid it's going to fail. And then Walt gets down on his knee, and with a tear in his eye, he was really good at this. He gets down on a knee, and with a tear in his eye, and he says, Jack, I've wanted this my entire life. I can't make it without a hotel. I'll give you the use of my name. You know how protective Disney is with copyrights and trademarks in their name. I'll give you the use of my name for 99 years. Please build me the hotel. And so Jack relents and agrees to build the Disneyland Hotel, which opened in October of 1955. Here's the kicker. Today, my friends, if you wanted to go to Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida, and you wanted to stay in a different Disney-owned room at a different Disney hotel, would take you more than 75 years before you ran out of Disney rooms. 75 years. And Walt had to get on his knees with a tear in his eye and beg for the very first one. How many rooms do you need for what you've been thinking about this week? How much room do you need for the seeds that have been planted, for the fields that need to be harvested, for where your business is going to go and grow? I've had a great time challenging you, and I just want you to know you really are what? Just getting started. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. With those thoughts in mind, let us have safe travels home and spread the message. So, thank you.